In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations.
Whispers are growing louder within the royal family as an unexpected and dramatic decision begins to take shape behind closed doors. Prince William has reportedly taken a firm stance, one that allegedly bars Prince Harry from Balmoral at a time when the stakes couldn't be higher. Meanwhile, King Charles is said to be quietly transferring authority, setting the stage for a moment tied to what would have been Queen Elizabeth's 100th birthday. But what is really driving this power shift, and why now? Do you believe that royal siblings could be sworn enemies? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments. To help us create more videos and reveal the real world, please subscribe so more people can discover this. The silent transfer of power. When King Charles III quietly decided to step back from directly handling the ongoing situation surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, it wasn't marked by headlines, speeches, or formal statements. There was no grand announcement to signal the shift. Instead, it unfolded subtly, so quietly that many did not immediately notice. Yet, beneath that calm surface, the consequences of his decision were powerful and far-reaching. In a single, carefully considered step, the king removed himself from the heart of a long-standing and deeply complicated issue, one that had been building tension within the royal family and capturing global attention for years. Rather than continuing to stand at the center of this storm, he chose a different path. He transferred the full weight of responsibility for all matters related to the Sussexes, everything from royal titles and financial considerations to their public role and image, into the hands of two of the monarchy's most steady and disciplined figures, Prince William and Princess Anne. This move was not a simple case of passing duties along. It was far more intentional than that. It was a strategic and thoughtful withdrawal, one that suggested a deeper understanding of both the pressures he faced and the direction he wanted the monarchy to take. By stepping aside, the king was not abandoning responsibility. Rather, he was redefining how that responsibility would be handled. At the time, much of the world's attention was fixed on preparations for a historic milestone, the upcoming centenary celebration of Queen Elizabeth II. This was no ordinary event. It was a moment meant to honor a legacy of extraordinary service, stability, and dedication. It required focus, unity, and a sense of calm dignity, qualities that could easily be overshadowed by ongoing family tensions if not carefully managed. Behind palace doors, however, the reality was far more complex. The king was not only navigating the demands of his role, but also dealing with personal challenges. Reports of his declining health, combined with the emotional weight of unresolved family issues, had begun to take their toll. The pressure was immense, and it became increasingly clear that continuing to engage directly in every aspect of the Sussex matter was no longer sustainable. Faced with these circumstances, King Charles made a choice that reflected both wisdom and restraint. Instead of allowing chaos to dictate his actions, he chose clarity. He simplified his priorities, focusing his energy on what mattered most at that critical time, honoring his mother's legacy and ensuring the continued stability of the monarchy. By entrusting Prince William and Princess Anne with the Sussex situation, he placed it in capable hands, individuals known for their firm approach, discipline, and commitment to duty. Both had demonstrated a willingness to confront difficult issues directly, without unnecessary delay or hesitation. In many ways, they represented a more decisive and action-oriented approach, one that contrasted with the prolonged uncertainty that had defined the situation in earlier years. This decision marked more than just a shift in responsibility. It signaled the beginning of a new chapter for the royal family. It suggested a move away from hesitation and internal strain toward a clearer, more structured way of handling challenges. The monarchy, in that moment, began to transition into a phase defined by stronger boundaries, sharper decision-making, and a renewed focus on its core purpose. What made this moment particularly striking was not just the decision itself, but the manner in which it was carried out. There was no drama, no visible conflict, only a quiet but firm adjustment of roles. And in that quietness lay its true power. Without raising his voice or drawing attention, King Charles reshaped the internal dynamics of the monarchy. He demonstrated that leadership is not always about standing at the center of every issue. Sometimes it is about knowing when to step back, when to trust others, and when to protect the greater good by choosing a different path. In doing so, he not only preserved his strength during a demanding period, but also set the stage for a more focused and resilient royal institution, one prepared to move forward with purpose and resolve. Who were those saddled with the responsibility of upholding the monarchy? How were they able to hand over to a new crown bearer? Let's delve into the details of the rise of the Iron Triad. Discipline over diplomacy. With real power now resting firmly in their hands, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward quietly formed what palace insiders began to describe as an Iron Triad. It was not an official title, but it captured something very real: a strong, united alliance built on a shared mission to guard the future of the monarchy against what they believed was an increasing threat from within. At the very heart of this powerful trio stood William. Where his father, King Charles III, had often chosen patience, diplomacy, and careful compromise, William's approach was noticeably different. His thinking was direct, focused, and far less flexible. To him, some lines simply could not be blurred. And at the center of his beliefs was one defining idea: royal titles are not tools to be used, they are duties to be carried. William viewed the monarchy not just as an institution, but as a centuries-old promise between the crown and the people. It is built on trust, sacrifice, and a sense of service that stretches far beyond any one generation. Titles such as prince or princess, in his eyes, are not labels for personal gain or public branding. They are symbols, deeply meaningful ones, that represent a lifelong commitment to serve others. So when those same titles begin to appear in commercial spaces, attached to media deals, personal brands, or profit-driven ventures, it raises serious concerns. To William, this was not a small issue or a harmless evolution. It was a shift that risked weakening the very meaning of the monarchy itself. Because once a title becomes something that can be used for personal advantage, its value begins to change. It stops being about service and starts being about opportunity. And that, to him, was where the real danger lay. From William's perspective, the situation surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle was especially troubling. It was not simply about disagreement or distance, it was about position. They no longer operated fully within the royal system, having stepped back from official duties, yet they still carried the recognition, influence, and global attention that came with their royal identities. This placed them in what William saw as a very risky middle ground. They were not entirely inside, but they were not completely outside either. And in a system like the monarchy, where clarity and structure are everything, that kind of in-between space creates confusion. It sends mixed signals to the public. It raises difficult questions about fairness, consistency, and what it truly means to be royal. To William, this was more than just complicated. It was unstable, because if one part of the institution begins to operate by a different set of rules, it becomes harder to maintain order across the whole. Others may begin to question where the boundaries lie. Expectations become unclear, and slowly, the foundation begins to shift. That is why the Iron Triad chose to act. Their goal was not drama or punishment, it was clarity. Step by step, changes were introduced behind palace walls. Internal policies became stricter. Oversight grew stronger. The space for uncertainty began to shrink. Quietly but firmly, a new direction was being set. And from that effort, a clear principle emerged, one that would guide the monarchy moving forward. There would be no more half in, half out. No blurred roles, no divided commitments, no uncertain positions. You are either fully within the system, serving, representing, and upholding its values, or you step away completely. For William, this was not about control, it was about protection. Because in his eyes, the survival of the monarchy depends on one simple truth: people must believe in it, and belief can only exist where there is consistency, honesty, and a clear sense of purpose. Anything less, he fears, risks turning tradition into something far more fragile. When and how did Harry get banned from the palace? Who spearheaded his ban? Let's dive into the details of the breaking point. Lines in the sand. By March 2026, what had long been simmering beneath the surface finally reached a breaking point. The quiet tensions that once lingered in the background of royal affairs had now become impossible to ignore. What was once a matter of private concern had grown into something far more serious, clear, visible, and demanding immediate attention. During a high-level meeting held within the historic walls of Windsor Castle, Prince William was said to have voiced a deep and unmistakable frustration. This was not a fleeting irritation, but a carefully considered concern built up over time. To him, the situation had evolved beyond vague unease. It had become concrete, specific, and increasingly urgent. At the heart of the issue was the continued use of royal titles, particularly those associated with Archie Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Mountbatten-Windsor, in ways that appeared to intersect with commercial interests and public ventures. While to some, this might have seemed harmless or even expected in a modern world, to William, it represented something far more troubling. In his view, a line had been crossed. Royal titles, he believed, are not simply decorative labels or sentimental family heirlooms to be used freely. They carry weight, meaning, and responsibility. These titles are granted by the sovereign and are deeply tied to a long-standing tradition of service, duty, and public trust. They symbolize a connection to the crown and, by extension, to the people it represents. Using such titles to enhance personal projects, attract attention, or secure commercial opportunities risked diluting their significance. It blurred the line between public duty and private interest, a line that, in William's perspective, must remain clear and protected at all costs. If that boundary were to erode, it could weaken not just individual credibility, but the very foundation upon which the monarchy stands. As discussions unfolded, there was a noticeable shift in tone. What began as concern gradually transformed into something more structured and resolute. William's position became clearer, firmer, less about personal feelings and more about institutional responsibility. This was no longer just about managing a sensitive family dynamic, it was about safeguarding the integrity of the crown itself. With this shift came a readiness to consider more serious measures. Conversations began to move beyond expressions of dissatisfaction toward the possibility of action. Among the ideas being explored was a review of how certain titles might be used in the future, especially if existing boundaries continued to be tested or ignored. Such considerations were not taken lightly. Any decision involving royal titles carries significant historical, emotional, and political weight. Yet for William, the priority was becoming increasingly clear: preserving the dignity and purpose of the monarchy, even if it required making difficult or unpopular choices. At the same time, the media began to amplify the situation. Headlines grew sharper, narratives more intense, and public interest surged. Every development was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed. This external pressure added another layer of complexity, turning an already delicate issue into a highly visible and widely debated topic. But rather than stepping back in the face of growing attention, William appeared to grow more resolute. He did not retreat from the conversation. Instead, he leaned into it, reinforcing his stance and making his position unmistakably clear. To him, this was not about optics or public relations. It was about principle. The message that emerged from this moment was firm and unambiguous. This situation had moved beyond the realm of a private family disagreement. It was no longer simply about differing perspectives or personal choices. It had become a matter of values, of protecting something larger than any individual. In the end, what stood at the center of it all was a fundamental question: what does it truly mean to carry a royal title? For William, the answer was clear. It meant responsibility, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to the institution it represents. And that, above all else, was worth defending. Why did William ban his blood brother? Is it a new rift? Could it be the usual old sibling rivalry? Let's find out. The truth behind the feud between William and Harry. For years, the story of a supposed physical clash between Prince William and Prince Harry has lingered in the public imagination, repeated in headlines, and debated across conversations worldwide. It became one of the most talked about moments in modern royal history, especially after Harry shared his version in his 2023 memoir, Spare. In that account, he described an emotionally charged argument with his older brother that, according to him, escalated into a physical encounter, an image that many found shocking and deeply symbolic of a relationship in crisis. However, as new insights begin to surface from individuals believed to be familiar with events inside royal circles, the story appears less clear-cut than it once seemed. Rather than confirming a dramatic physical fight, these newer perspectives suggest a more layered and emotionally complex situation, one that may have been shaped as much by perception and personal interpretation as by actual events. A recently discussed royal biography introduces an alternative view, one that does not dismiss the seriousness of the disagreement, but questions whether it ever turned physical at all. According to this account, the confrontation between the brothers was undeniably intense. Voices were reportedly raised, emotions ran high, and long-held frustrations surfaced in a powerful exchange. Yet, those close to the matter describe it as stopping short of physical violence, framing it instead as a deeply emotional clash between two individuals struggling to be heard and understood. This shift in narrative changes the way the situation is viewed. Rather than focusing on a single dramatic moment, it draws attention to something more enduring and perhaps more important, a growing emotional distance between two brothers who were once known for their closeness. Their bond, formed through shared childhood experiences and life in the public eye, now seems strained under the weight of years of unresolved tension. A major source of this tension appears to be Harry's strong desire to defend his wife, Meghan Markle, during a period when she faced intense criticism from the media and public. For Harry, standing by her was not just a choice, but a responsibility. Yet within the royal household, differences in opinion about how to handle such challenges reportedly created friction. These disagreements did not exist in isolation. They built upon earlier misunderstandings, gradually widening the gap between the brothers. The situation became even more complicated following the couple's decision in 2020 to step away from their roles as senior members of the royal family. This move, while significant for Harry and Meghan, reportedly left behind feelings of disappointment and confusion within the family. It marked a turning point, not just in public perception, but in private relationships as well. What had once been a united front began to feel divided, with each side carrying its own version of events and emotions. What makes this story truly compelling is not simply the question of whether a physical altercation occurred. Instead, it lies in what the situation reveals about human relationships, especially those lived under constant public scrutiny. The pressures of royal life, combined with media attention and personal differences, can create an environment where even small misunderstandings grow into larger conflicts. Over time, unspoken feelings and unmet expectations can quietly weaken even the strongest bonds. In many ways, the story of William and Harry is less about a single argument and more about the gradual drifting apart of two people who once stood side by side. It reflects how relationships can change, not always through dramatic events, but through a series of moments that go unresolved. Yet despite the distance that now seems to define their connection, there remains a sense of cautious hope. Observers, and those familiar with the family, continue to suggest that reconciliation, while challenging, is still possible. Time, reflection, and changing circumstances may one day create an opportunity for healing. Until then, the relationship between the brothers appears to exist in a quiet space, less defined by conflict than by a lingering tension that has not yet found resolution. And perhaps, in this more nuanced understanding, we are reminded that behind every headline is a deeper, more human story, one of emotion, complexity, and the difficult journey toward understanding. How did the ban take effect? Was it loudly contested by Prince Harry? Let's dig into the details of the distinct separation that was without negotiation. The steel wall strategy. As summer drew closer, the monarchy's response began to shift from quiet restraint to something far more deliberate, visible, and organized, what those within royal circles came to describe as the steel wall. This was not mere symbolism, nor was it an emotional reaction. It was a calculated structure, carefully built to create distance where once there had been closeness. Every detail was considered, every boundary was intentional. In the past, royal summers followed a familiar and almost comforting rhythm. There were public appearances filled with celebration and tradition, followed by private retreats where family bonds were strengthened away from the spotlight, particularly at Balmoral Castle. It was a season that blended duty with togetherness. But in 2026, that rhythm changed. This time, the Sussexes were noticeably absent from the pattern, not quietly phased out, but clearly and unmistakably excluded. There were no invitations extended, no casual drop-ins entertained, no overlapping spaces where encounters might happen naturally. The silence was not accidental, it was structured. Behind the scenes, adjustments were made to ensure that this separation was not just understood, but firmly maintained. Security protocols were revised with precision. Any potential visit from the Sussexes would no longer be handled within the framework of royal family engagement. Instead, it would be treated as the arrival of a high-profile private individual, someone external to the working core of the monarchy. Access to royal residences became more controlled than ever. Spaces that were once shared without question were now carefully guarded. Even lines of communication, once informal and familial, were narrowed and monitored. Nothing was left to chance. At the center of this approach was a guiding belief, simple yet powerful. Clarity protects stability. For the monarchy, ambiguity had proven costly in the past. Mixed signals, blurred roles, and undefined boundaries had created confusion both internally and in the public eye. This time, there would be no uncertainty. The message was clear, consistent, and unwavering. Supporting this position was Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose role in this moment was both quiet and significant. Having endured intense public attention and scrutiny in recent years, she understood deeply the weight of perception and the cost of misinterpretation. Rather than waver, she stood firmly beside the decision. For her, and for Prince William, the focus was not on conflict, but on protection. Protection of their children, protection of their peace, and above all, protection of the dignity and long-term stability of the institution they represent. There were moments, brief and cautious, when the idea of reconciliation surfaced. Conversations hinted at the possibility, however distant, of rebuilding bridges. But each time, the same concern rose to the surface. It was not about personal feelings, it was about consequences. Any interaction, no matter how private its intention, carried the risk of becoming a global spectacle. In an age where every moment can be captured, interpreted, and amplified, even the smallest meeting could spiral into headlines, speculation, and renewed tension. Old wounds, carefully managed, could be reopened in an instant. And so, the decision was made, not out of anger, but out of foresight. The steel wall remained in place. It stood not as a form of punishment, nor as an act of rejection, but as a necessary shield. A way to create space where emotions could settle, where the monarchy could continue its work without distraction, and where stability could be preserved without compromise. In the end, it was less about keeping someone out, and more about holding everything else together. How did this action affect the monarchy? Could it truly define the monarchy's moral and just image? Let's find out what this action means for the future of the monarchy amidst duty and identity issues. A monarchy redefined. By the middle of 2026, what once seemed like a private family disagreement had grown into something much bigger, something that went beyond personal relationships and began to reshape the very meaning of belonging to the royal family itself. It was no longer just about tension between individuals. It had become a clear divide between two very different ways of life. On one side was a new modern path, one that embraced independence, personal freedom, and the power of media. This path blended public influence with business ventures, storytelling, and carefully built personal brands. It allowed room for individuality, for shaping one's own narrative, and for stepping outside the rigid expectations that have long defined royal life. On the other side stood a more traditional vision, one deeply rooted in history and guided by a strong sense of duty. This path was not about personal expression, but about service. It emphasized responsibility over recognition, consistency over popularity, and a lifelong commitment to an institution that has stood for generations. Here, the focus remained firmly on the public, not the individual. For Prince William, the choice between these two paths was not difficult, it was inevitable. In his view, the monarchy cannot function in fragments. It cannot afford to send mixed signals or appear uncertain about its role. At its core, it must remain a system built on trust, steady, dependable, and clear in its purpose. Every action, every appearance, and every message must align with that purpose. There is no space for confusion and no room for half measures. This belief led to what many began to describe as the steel wall, not just a reaction to immediate challenges, but a deliberate and carefully considered approach to the future. It was not about shutting people out for the sake of it, but about protecting the integrity of the crown. It set boundaries, drew clear lines, and ensured that the monarchy would not be pulled in conflicting directions. Over time, this steel wall started to look less like a temporary solution and more like a lasting strategy, a framework designed to guard against uncertainty and preserve the strength of the institution for years to come. At the same time, the approach of the 100th birth anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II cast a long and meaningful shadow over these developments. Her life stood as a powerful example of what the monarchy could be at its very best. She represented stability in times of change, continuity in moments of disruption, and a quiet, unwavering strength that rarely needed to announce itself. In remembering her legacy, the contrast became even clearer. On one hand, there was a future shaped by modern influence and personal direction. On the other, a future grounded in tradition, discipline, and a deep sense of service. It was within this contrast that the next chapter of the monarchy began to take form, and at the center of it stood Prince William, not simply as the next in line, but as a leader already stepping into his role. He appeared increasingly willing to make difficult, even uncomfortable decisions if they meant securing the long-term future of the institution he is destined to inherit. This was not leadership driven by emotion or impulse, but by a clear understanding of responsibility. It required firmness, clarity, and at times, the courage to draw lines that others might hesitate to draw. Because in the end, the message he seemed to be sending was both simple and uncompromising. The crown is not something that can be carried halfway. Text wrapping break. It does not bend to convenience, nor does it adjust itself to personal preference. To wear it, truly wear it, means to give yourself fully to its demands, its discipline, and its purpose. And if that full commitment cannot be made, then there is only one honest alternative: to step away completely. So, what do you think about William's ban on Harry? Could it be more than sibling rivalry? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.